The morning sun hit the garage like a judge's gavel, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Marcus "Ghost" Holloway stood motionless in front of the Harley-Davidson, a 1989 fat boy, midnight black, with silver accents that gleamed like bone in the half-light. 43 years. That's how long he'd owned this machine, longer than most marriages, longer than his own life had meaning before the wheels started turning. Have you ever had to choose between love and freedom? Watch what happens when one man discovers they might be the same thing. His calloused hands trembled as he ran his fingers along the leather seat, still warm from the sun. The bike smelled like gasoline, old leather, and memories, some sweet, most bitter. This machine had carried him through 2 failed marriages, 3 stints in county, a decade riding with the Forsaken Sons MC, and countless nights when death seemed like a kinder option than living. The keys hung from a chain on his belt loop, exactly where they'd been since 1980. Ghost reached for them, then stopped. His phone buzzed on the metal workbench behind him. "Grandpa, I'm scared." It was a text from Emma, his granddaughter, 17 years old, lying in a hospital bed 300 miles away, with 2 fractured vertebrae, a ruptured disc, and medical bills that totaled more than he'd earned in 15 years. The drunk driver who hit her had insurance that covered none of it. A miracle of American justice, Ghost thought bitterly. The hospital's financial advisor had delivered the news like a death sentence. Without payment, they'd transfer Emma to a state facility with a 6-month waiting list for physical therapy. 6 months. In 6 months, the nerve damage could become permanent. In 6 months, his granddaughter might never walk again without pain. Ghost sat on his workbench, the phone heavy in his weathered hand. He looked at the Harley again, really looked at it. The chrome pipes that sang like an engine prayer on open roads, the custom leather bags he'd had hand-stitched in Sturgis, the speedometer that had never dropped below 50 on Interstate 90. The bike was insured for $72,000 after taxes, dealer fees, and the loan he still owed. He'd clear enough to cover 3 months of treatment, maybe 4 if he negotiated hard. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. His hands moved before his mind could argue. Ghost walked to the bike's ignition, pulled the key from his belt, and held it up to the morning light. The key caught the sun, throwing a small rainbow across his forearm, a tattoo of a Forsaken Sons patch, inked when he was 23, and convinced he'd found his tribe, his purpose, his home. The MC was family, but Emma was blood. He placed the key on the seat of the bike and stepped back. His chest felt like it was collapsing inward, like all the air was being sucked out through a wound he couldn't see but could absolutely feel. This wasn't just a motorcycle. This was the last piece of his freedom, the one thing in his life that nobody could take from him because he'd already given away everything else. His dignity, his time, his first daughter's childhood. Ghost walked toward the garage door, each step heavier than the last. His knees ached. His hip, shattered in a bar fight 30 years ago, screamed with every movement. He was old, tired, used up like a burnt-out engine, but his granddaughter was 17, and she was terrified, and she was his. He reached for his phone and dialed the number he hadn't called in 6 months. Dakota Customs. "This is Reese speaking." "Yeah," Ghost said, his voice cracking like rust. "I need to sell my bike." 3 days later, Ghost sat in the waiting room of Metropolitan Medical Center, watching Emma through a half-open door as she lay in the hospital bed. Her brown hair, she had her mother's hair, was matted against the pillow. Her eyes were closed, but he could see the twitching beneath her eyelids. Even unconscious, she was afraid. The motorcycle was gone. The sale had gone through that afternoon. Dakota Customs paid cash. No questions asked. $78,000. Ghost had walked out of that shop feeling like a ghost in truth, transparent, weightless, hollowed out. He'd immediately transferred 50,000 to the hospital. It bought them 4 months of aggressive physical therapy, the best neurologist on the East Coast, and a shot at walking again without nerve damage defining her future. The remaining 28,000 he'd deposited into a trust account for her education. The bike was gone, but Emma might have a life. Ghost's phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. "Yeah? Ghost? It's Tiny." The voice was rough, low, unmistakable. Tiny was the president of the Forsaken Sons MC, a 300-pound wall of muscle and scar tissue who'd been riding with Ghost since 1995. They'd done time together. They'd bled for the club together. "Need you at the clubhouse tonight, 7 p.m. Don't be late." The line went dead. Ghost sat in the fluorescent-lit hallway, nurses moving past him like ghosts themselves, and felt a knot of dread form in his stomach. MC business. Full-patch meeting. He hadn't been to church in 6 months, hadn't had the stomach for it since his daughter had called him a fossil clinging to a dead man's club. He'd reduced himself to prospect status, hanging around the bar on weekends but staying out of the real work. Had something happened? Was someone in trouble? At 6:47 p.m., Ghost stood outside the Forsaken Sons clubhouse, a sprawling concrete warehouse on the industrial side of town, marked only by a faded patch painted on the brick wall. The roar of engines filled the parking lot. He counted bikes in his head like a man counting his last breaths. 1, 2, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30. More kept coming. By 7:15 p.m., there were 97 motorcycles parked in the lot, their engines idling in a low rumble that made the ground vibrate. Ghost recognized riders from Chapters 3, states away. Nomads, prospects. Full patches who didn't ride unless something serious was happening. His heart hammered against his ribs. Tiny stood at the clubhouse door, his massive frame backlit by neon beer signs. When he saw Ghost, his weathered face cracked into something that might have been a smile. He raised his hand, gesturing Ghost forward through the sea of leather and chrome. The main room of the clubhouse fell silent as Ghost walked in. 97 bikers, maybe more, all turning to look at him. The air smelled like motor oil, old whiskey and cigarette smoke, the scent of brotherhood, of men who'd chosen each other as family because blood family had failed them. Tiny put a massive hand on Ghost's shoulder. "You sold your bike," Tiny said. Not a question. Ghost's jaw tightened. "Had to." "For your granddaughter." "Yeah." The room was absolutely silent. Ghost could hear his own heartbeat, could hear the faint beep of the hospital monitor still echoing in his ears from Emma's room. Tiny turned toward the crowd and raised his voice. "This man gave up his ride for his family. That's what we do. That's what Forsaken Sons means." He turned back to Ghost, and there were tears on the old biker's weathered face. "We don't let our brothers ride alone." The room erupted. Not in anger. In sound, a roar of engines, boots stomping the concrete, voices raised in a chant Ghost recognized. "Forsaken Sons, Forsaken Sons, Forsaken Sons." Tiny pulled Ghost toward the back of the clubhouse to the workshop area, and there, under the harsh fluorescent lights, Ghost saw what had gathered 97 bikers from across the country. His breath stopped. Parked in the workshop, gleaming like a shrine, was a motorcycle that didn't exist yesterday. It was a Harley-Davidson Road Glide Ultra. Brand new, midnight black with silver accents that matched the fat boy he'd sold. But this wasn't just any bike. Ghost's hands moved without permission from his brain, running along the custom chrome work, the leather seats, the handlebars that felt like they were shaped for his palms alone. On the seat lay a leather jacket, brand new, the Forsaken Sons patch already embroidered on the back in silver thread. 97 chapters, Tiny said quietly beside him. 97 men, from Seattle to Miami, each one put in. Some had to sell their own bikes to make it happen. Some worked double shifts. Some borrowed against their houses. Tiny's voice cracked slightly. Nobody asked questions. Nobody complained, because that's what family does. Ghost's hands were shaking so badly he could barely touch the bike. His vision blurred. "Your granddaughter's going to walk again," Tiny continued, "and when she does, we want her to know that her grandfather rides with men who don't abandon their own. That honor means something, that promises made in leather last forever." Ghost sank to his knees on the concrete floor. His shoulders heaved. He was 68 years old, a career criminal, a man who'd lost everything he ever tried to keep, and he was crying like a child in front of his brothers. Tiny knelt beside him, this massive man, this president of an outlaw motorcycle club, and wrapped his arms around Ghost like he was protecting him from the entire world. "You're not riding alone anymore, brother," Tiny whispered. "You never were. And now I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you." The next morning, Ghost sat on the new Harley in his garage, still wearing the leather jacket that smelled like fresh tanning oil and brotherhood. He hadn't started the engine yet. He was afraid that if he did, he'd wake up and find this was all a fever dream, that he'd still be hollowed out and alone, watching his granddaughter suffer while he worked at a gas station at minimum wage. But the bike was real. The leather was real. The memory of 97 engines harmonizing in the parking lot at dusk was burned into his mind. His daughter called just after 10 a.m. "Dad, what the hell happened?" "The hospital called. Someone paid Emma's bills, all of them. $142,000. Her voice cracked. Didn't do it alone," Ghost said quietly. "The club." Silence on the other end. Long silence. His daughter, Sarah, hadn't spoken to him in 3 years, not since the night she'd screamed at him that he was a parasite, a wasted life, that Emma deserved better than a criminal grandfather. That night, Ghost had accepted every word as truth because he'd believed them about himself for so long. "The Forsaken Sons," she said finally. "Yeah." Another silence. Then, "They're bad people, Dad. You know that." Ghost looked at the new Harley, at the Forsaken Sons patch on the leather jacket hanging over the workbench, at the keys in his hand that represented 97 men who'd stepped into a void he didn't know existed. "They're my family," he said, "and they proved it when nobody else would." He hung up before she could respond. The garage door was open, morning light flooding in. Ghost could see the driveway where his neighbors walked their dogs, where normal people lived normal lives without patches on their backs or iron in their blood. He'd spent 68 years trying to be normal. It had made him invisible. The Forsaken Sons made him visible. They made him matter. Ghost kicked the Harley to life. The engine roared, a sound that was somewhere between a growl and a prayer. The vibration traveled up through his hands, his arms, settling into his chest like his heart had just remembered how to beat. He rode that morning to the hospital, the wind rushing past his face like forgiveness. When he reached Emma's floor, she was sitting up in bed, looking at her phone when he walked in. Her eyes went wide. "Grandpa?" She barely recognized him in the new jacket, on the pride that was suddenly visible in his shoulders. Ghost sat on the edge of her bed and took her hand gently. "Baby, I need you to understand something. The world's going to tell you that certain kinds of families are better than others, that some people matter less because of who they choose to ride with or what they've done. Don't believe that." He squeezed her hand. "The men who paid for your healing, they're criminals according to the law. They're outcasts, but they're also the most honorable people I know, and that matters more than anything the law says about them." Emma started to cry, and Ghost held her, carefully because of her spine, but completely, while she wept into his new leather jacket, breathing in the smell of engine oil and brotherhood. 2 weeks later, Ghost was sitting in the Forsaken Sons clubhouse when Detective Morris walked through the door with 2 uniforms behind him. Morris was dirty. Everyone in the club knew it. He took payments from dealers and looked the other way when shipments came through the warehouse district. But he was also Ghost's old cellmate from 15 years ago, and he'd never forgotten that Ghost had protected him in the shower room when a gang from the North Block had marked him for death. "We're looking for information about the Velocity Cartel's operation," Morris said, his eyes scanning the room and landing on Ghost. "Heard some of you might know something." The club went silent. Tiny was out, so Second Vice President Razor stepped forward, a scarred man with one glass eye and a reputation for not flinching when violence was threatened. "We don't know nothing," Razor said flatly. Morris smiled. "That's interesting, because we have video of Ghost here meeting with a known Velocity associate 3 days ago. That makes it conspiracy. That makes it federal." Ghost's blood went cold. He hadn't met with anyone. He'd been at the hospital, but Morris was setting a trap. He could see it in the detective's eyes. Dirty cops always had an endgame. "Prove it," Razor said, stepping forward. He was half Morris's size, but moved like a predator. "Show the video, show the witness, or get the hell out of our clubhouse." Morris's hand moved to his belt. The 3 uniforms behind him tensed. That's when Tiny walked in through the back door, followed by a lawyer. Not a clubhouse lawyer, but a real one. Expensive suit, Harvard degree, the kind who defended corporations and politicians. "Detectives," the lawyer said smoothly. "I'm James Chen, representing the Forsaken Sons, MC. I trust you have a warrant for this search?" Morris's face flushed. "We're just asking questions. Without a warrant, my clients have no obligation to speak with you, and given that you just threatened one of them while present without legal representation, I'll be filing a complaint with the district attorney's office." Chen gestured toward the door. "Now, unless you have actual evidence and actual warrants, I suggest you leave." Morris stared at Ghost for a long moment, then turned and left, the uniforms following like dogs called off a hunt. When they were gone, Tiny pulled Ghost aside into the back office. "Morris is going to come after you harder now," Tiny said. "He's got a reputation to protect. He can't let it slide that you embarrassed him in front of the club." "I didn't meet with anyone," Ghost said. "Don't matter." Tiny sat behind the desk, his massive frame making the chair look like a toy. "Morris will fabricate evidence if he needs to. He's got nothing to lose. Federal charges will end you." Ghost felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders like a yoke. "I shouldn't have let you buy me that bike. I brought this on the club." "No!" Tiny's voice was sharp. "This is about loyalty. Morris is testing to see if the club will fold when pressure comes. If we do, we're finished. Every cop in the city will know we break ranks when threatened." Tiny leaned forward. "We need to show Morris that attacking one of us means attacking all of us." "How?" "We're working on it," Tiny said, "but you need to be smart. Don't go anywhere alone. Don't talk to nobody. And Ghost." "Whoa." Tiny fixed him with a stare that had broken men. "Trust us. We didn't give you that bike just to watch you go down. We're already making moves." Ghost left the clubhouse that night with more questions than answers. But for the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to truly belong to something. It wasn't freedom anymore. It was something deeper. It was the weight of knowing that 97 people had your back, and that weight was heavier than any burden he'd carried alone. 3 days later, Morris was arrested. The details emerged slowly through the clubhouse grapevine. Morris had been under investigation by Internal Affairs for 18 months. The Forsaken Sons lawyer, James Chen, had gone to the DA with evidence, not fabricated but real, of Morris taking bribes from dealers, of evidence tampering, of assaults committed while wearing a badge. The DA had been building a case but hadn't had enough. Chen's information provided the final pieces. Morris's mugshot hit the local news, dirty cop exposed, his entire career dismantled in 72 hours. Ghost watched the news report on the clubhouse TV and felt something like relief mixed with dread. Morris was gone. The threat had evaporated. But Ghost also understood what had just happened. The club had used its resources, its connections, its collective power to remove a problem. They'd done it cleanly, legally, without leaving fingerprints. That kind of coordination, that kind of reach, it meant the Forsaken Sons weren't just a motorcycle club. They were an organization, a force. Tiny appeared beside him, 2 beers in hand. "Morris will do 5 to 7, minimum," Tiny said, handing Ghost a beer. "He'll never wear a badge again. And every dirty cop in this city just learned what happens when they come after Forsaken Sons. Like this video and subscribe. What happens next will prove that some families protect their own no matter the cost. Comment below, would you risk everything for family chosen by the road? That night, Ghost rode his new Harley to the hospital. Emma was doing physical therapy now, painful sessions where she learned to walk again with the help of a therapist who treated her like a human being instead of a casualty. She was strong. His granddaughter was a fighter. When he walked into her room, she was standing at the parallel bars, sweat on her forehead, determination carved into her jaw. She saw him and smiled, a real smile, not the forced ones from weeks before. "I walked 10 steps today," she said, without leaning. Ghost crossed the room and held her as she moved, slowly, carefully. From the bars to the chair, each step was a victory, each movement was a promise kept. "Grandpa," Emma said as they sat, "Mom told me about the detective. She said the motorcycle club saved you." Ghost nodded. "Are you okay with that? With them being the way they are?" Ghost thought about the question carefully. He was a 68-year-old man with a criminal record, a shattered spine at 50, and a life that had been mostly failure and regret. The Forsaken Sons had turned him into something else. They'd given him purpose. They'd made his sacrifice mean something. "Yeah," he said finally, "I'm okay with it. Because family is what you choose when blood family can't be what you need them to be." Emma squeezed his hand and didn't let go. 6 weeks into recovery, Emma was walking with a cane instead of a walker. The doctor said the nerve damage was minimal. Aggressive physical therapy and aggressive hope had combined into a miracle, or at least a close approximation of one. She'd be able to go to college. She'd be able to dance at her own wedding someday. She'd be able to live a life that wasn't defined by one drunk driver's moment of carelessness. Ghost had attended his first full MC church meeting since Emma's accident. The club had voted unanimously to keep him as full patch, despite his reduced status. More than that, they'd voted to make him senior advisor on matters involving family, a position that carried weight, responsibility, and respect. At 32, Tiny had essentially created the role for Ghost, an old man's wisdom combined with lived experience of what it meant to sacrifice everything for blood. One afternoon, Ghost was working on his new Harley in the garage when a young prospect named Tommy pulled in on his bike, a used Sportster, nothing fancy, but maintained like it was holy. "Ghost?" Tommy said, removing his helmet. He was maybe 22, Hispanic, with tattoos on his neck that told stories Ghost recognized. Gang background, prison time, conversion to the club. "Tiny said I should come talk to you." "About what?" "My little sister." Tommy sat on the workbench, looking smaller than he was, diminished by something internal. "She's in trouble, real trouble. Social services is about to take her. And my mom can't afford the lawyer to fight custody. I don't have the money. I was thinking maybe—" He trailed off, ashamed. Ghost understood immediately. Tommy was considering a robbery, maybe a score from a dealer. Something fast and violent to generate quick money. It was the code of the streets. When your family is drowning, you do whatever it takes to save them. "How much?" Ghost asked. 15 grand, maybe 20. Ghost wiped his hands on a rag and looked at Tommy carefully. This young man had chosen the club. This young man had brothers now, and brothers didn't let brothers fall into the violence trap to save family. "Come with me," Ghost said. He took Tommy to the clubhouse and went directly to Tiny's office. 5 minutes later, Tiny was making a phone call to the club's lawyer. By that evening, $20,000 had been transferred to Tommy's mother's legal account, a loan formalized and recorded, with a payment plan that Tommy could manage working legitimate jobs. "Why?" Tommy asked Ghost afterward, tears streaming down his face. "I'm just a prospect. I don't even have my colors yet." "Because that's what family does," Ghost said. "And because I understand what it costs to choose between survival and honor, the club makes sure you don't have to make that choice alone." After Tommy left, Ghost sat in the clubhouse bar with Tiny, nursing a whiskey. "He's going to be a good man," Tiny said. "Yeah," Ghost agreed. "Now he will be." "You know what I realized?" Tiny continued. "When we bought you that bike, we weren't just helping you. We were making an investment in a philosophy. We were proving to every young prospect, every prospect's family, every person who was thinking about joining us, that loyalty goes both ways, that sacrifice isn't one-directional." Ghost nodded slowly. He understood now why they'd done it. It wasn't charity, it was strategy, yes. But more than that, it was a statement about what they valued as a club, what they were willing to die for. "Emma's going to walk," Ghost said. "She's going to have a real life. Because of you," Tiny said. "Because you were willing to give up everything. Because of 97 brothers who couldn't let me do it alone," Ghost corrected. Tiny raised his glass. Ghost raised his. The clink of glass echoed through the bar, like a prayer answered. 3 months after the first surgery, Emma was released from the hospital with a clean bill of health, prescribed gentle exercise and time. The doctor said she'd fully recover by graduation, 18 months away. No permanent damage, no chronic pain, a second chance. The Forsaken Sons decided to throw her a party, not a normal party, a patch ceremony. Ghost didn't understand at first. Emma was 17, female, and had nothing to do with the motorcycle club, but Tiny explained she was being honored as Old Lady Emeritus, a designation created specifically for family members of the club who'd sacrificed or been sacrificed for, whose lives had been touched by the brotherhood and strengthened by it. The ceremony took place on a Saturday in autumn at a clearing outside the city where the club held events. 87 bikers showed up, some couldn't travel, and they formed a semicircle around Ghost, Emma and Tiny. Tiny placed a custom leather jacket on Emma's shoulders. It was small, fitted for her teenage frame, and it had a patch on the back, the Forsaken Sons logo stitched in silver thread, with Emma's name embroidered beneath it and a date, the day of the drunk driver, the day her life changed. "Emma Holloway," Tiny said formally, his voice carrying across the field, "you are recognized as blood family of the Forsaken Sons. You have shown courage in recovery. You have shown honor in loyalty to your grandfather, and your grandfather has shown us what sacrifice truly means. You carry our patch, you carry our name, you carry our protection." Emma was crying but smiling. She looked at Ghost, and Ghost saw something in her eyes he'd never seen before, pride in her grandfather. Not shame, not disappointment, pride. 87 engines roared to life simultaneously, a sound that seemed to shake the earth. It was the club's salute, their acknowledgement, their acceptance, their love. Ghost put his arm around his granddaughter, and they stood together as the sound washed over them like a baptism. Later that evening, after most of the bikers had left, Ghost and Emma sat on the hood of a truck, watching the sun descend toward the horizon. "I'm scared sometimes," Emma said quietly, "about my future, about whether I'm really going to be okay." "You will be," Ghost said, "because you have 97 brothers watching your back now." Emma laughed. "They're not my brothers." "Maybe not in the traditional sense," Ghost agreed. "But family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about men and women choosing to stand for something bigger than themselves. Sometimes it's about a promise made on asphalt and kept in leather and chrome." Emma rested her head on her grandfather's shoulder. "I'm proud of you, Grandpa," she said. Ghost felt something break open inside his chest, something that had been calcified by decades of shame and regret. It cracked and light poured in. "I love you, baby," he said, "more than I've loved anything." The morning of Emma's graduation dawned clear and bright. The kind of late May day that felt like a promise itself. Ghost woke early in his apartment, a small place above a diner that he rented month to month. Nothing fancy, but clean and honest. He sat on the edge of his bed and looked at the leather jacket hanging on the chair across the room, the forsaken sun's patch, gleaming in the early light. 43 years he'd worn club colors. 43 years of riding, of brothers, of violence and redemption, cycling through his life in patterns he'd long stopped questioning. But this moment, Emma's graduation, felt different. This wasn't about the club's wars or the street's politics. This was about something pure. This was about a young woman who'd been broken and had chosen to heal, not because it was easy, but because she'd learned what her grandfather's sacrifice meant. Ghost showered and dressed carefully. He wore his colors, the leather jacket with the forsaken sun's patch prominent on the back, his sleeves rolled to show the tattoos beneath, dates, names, the outline of a motorcycle on his left arm, and a woman's face on his right. His first wife, Sarah's mother, dead 15 years from cancer. He polished his boots until he could see his reflection in them. He combed his grey hair back, revealing the scar that ran from his temple to his jaw, a gift from a bar fight in 1998, when a rival club had tried to claim territory in the warehouse district. Looking at himself in the mirror, Ghost barely recognized the man staring back. He looked like someone who'd been broken and rebuilt. Not with the same materials, but with something stronger, something that had learned the difference between hardness and strength. The drive to the high school took 40 minutes. Ghost rode his new Harley, feeling the weight of it beneath him, a weight that had become familiar, comforting. The bike had become an extension of himself, just as the first one had been. But this bike carried something different. It carried the memory of 97 men standing together, deciding that one old man's sacrifice mattered. The school parking lot was already filling when Ghost arrived at 7:47 a.m., 13 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. He found a spot near the gymnasium and parked carefully, watching as families emerged from cars with cameras and flowers and pride written across their faces. That's when he noticed the other motorcycles. At first, there were just a few. Bikers he recognized from the club, dressed in their colors despite the conservative setting. Then more arrived. Tiny pulled in on his Road King, Dakota on his Softail, Razor on his vintage Electra Glide. Ghost counted. 5, then 10, then 20. They parked in loose formation across the back section of the lot, a small army of leather and chrome. By the time the ceremony was scheduled to start, 93 Forsaken Sons bikers had gathered in the parking lot of Lincoln High School. Ghost went inside to find Emma in the holding area, waiting with the other graduating seniors. She was wearing her white graduation gown, her hair done up in an intricate braid that her mother had spent an hour perfecting. When she saw Ghost, her face lit up. That pure, unfiltered joy that had been so rare in the past year. "Grandpa," she said, rushing toward him despite being told to stay in line. She hugged him carefully, mindful of his aging body, but with the full force of her heart. "You came early." "Wouldn't miss it," Ghost said, holding her. "You ready?" Emma pulled back to look at him. "I'm terrified. What if I fall? What if my leg gives out on the stage?" Ghost placed his weathered hands on either side of her face, a gesture he'd learned from Tiny years ago, the way you told someone they mattered, that you saw them completely. "You're going to walk across that stage like you've walked across every obstacle this year," Ghost said quietly. "Strong, determined, like a woman who knows exactly who she is and where she's going. Your body isn't going to fail you because your spirit won't let it." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded and returned to her place in line. The ceremony began at 8:30 a.m. with the march of 247 graduating seniors into the gymnasium. Ghost sat in the audience in the middle section, 4th row back, surrounded by other families. He wore his colors proudly, knowing that some of the other parents would judge him, would see the forsaken son's patch, and make assumptions about his character, his worth, his place in Emma's life. He didn't care. Ghost had spent too many years apologizing for who he was to be broken by strangers' judgments now. The principal gave a speech about futures and possibilities. The valedictorian talked about resilience. A choir sang the national anthem. And then the names began. Ghost watched as senior after senior cross the stage to collect their diploma, shake the principal's hand, smile for the camera. Most of them walked across like it was just another moment in their lives. For many of them, it was. They'd never been broken. They'd never had to fight to walk. Then, Emma Marie Holloway. Ghost's heart stopped. She emerged from the wings, moving slowly, deliberately, with the confidence of someone who'd earned every step. Her graduation gown flowed behind her, hiding the slight asymmetry in her gait, but Ghost could see it, the strength in her shoulders, the determination in her jaw, the way she decided not to hide the journey but to wear it like a medal. Emma walked across that stage, and Ghost saw his entire life reflected in her movement. Every sacrifice he'd ever made suddenly made sense. Every time he'd chosen the hard path over the easy one, every time he'd stood for something when standing was painful, every time he'd believed that honor meant something. It all led to this moment, to his granddaughter walking across a stage without fear, without shame, with pride. She crossed to the principal, shook his hand, smiled for the camera with a radiance that made the light seem dim by comparison. And then she looked directly into the audience, found Ghost among the hundreds of faces, and winked. Ghost felt something break open inside his chest again, that same cracking sensation he'd experienced when Emma had told him she was proud of him. But this time, instead of light, it felt like his entire heart was expanding, growing larger with each beat until it threatened to consume him. He stood up without thinking, unable to stay seated, and he clapped. He clapped hard enough that people around him turned to stare, but Ghost didn't care. He clapped for his granddaughter. He clapped for the year of pain that had led to this moment. He clapped for 97 brothers who decided that a young woman's future mattered. He clapped for himself, for the old man he'd been and the man he'd become. Emma finished her walk, returned backstage, and Ghost sat down again, wiping his eyes with the back of his weathered hand. Around him, other families watched this leather-clad biker cry for his granddaughter, and Ghost saw some of their judgments soften. They recognized something in his tears, the universal language of a parent or grandparent witnessing a moment they thought might never come. The rest of the ceremony blurred. More names, more students, more moments of pride and joy. But Ghost's attention was fixed on the exit, waiting for the moment when all 247 graduates would be announced and the crowd would explode into applause and movement. When it came, Ghost moved with the flow of people toward the gymnasium doors, where Emma and her family would gather for photographs and celebrations. He walked slowly, his hip aching with each step, his age pressing down on him like gravity. But he walked with purpose. He had somewhere to be. He had someone waiting for him. Outside the gymnasium, in the bright sunlight, Emma found him almost immediately. She'd changed out of her graduation gown and into regular clothes, jeans and a white blouse that made her look older somehow, like she'd aged years in the moments it took to walk across that stage. "Grandpa," she said, throwing her arms around him, "did you see?" "I saw everything," Ghost said, holding her. "I saw a young woman who refused to let pain define her future." Emma pulled back. "I heard the motorcycles in the parking lot. Are those—" "Yeah," Ghost said. "Your brothers. They wanted to be here." Emma's eyes went wide. She looked toward the parking lot where 87 bikers stood in formation beside their machines, wearing their colors like armor. When they saw her looking, they raised their fists in salute, a gesture of recognition, of brotherhood, of love. Emma turned back to Ghost, tears streaming down her face. "Why would they do that? For me?" "Because you're family," Ghost said simply. "And because loyalty isn't just a word the club uses, it's a way of living." Emma's mother appeared, Sarah, Ghost's daughter, who'd spent years disapproving of his life with the club. She saw the formation of motorcycles in the parking lot, saw the leather and chrome, saw the men who'd paid for her daughter's healing. For a moment, her face hardened, but then she looked at Emma, at the light in her granddaughter's eyes, at the pride on her face, and something shifted in Sarah's expression. She stepped forward and kissed Ghost on the cheek. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." Ghost didn't trust himself to speak, so he just nodded. The celebration continued through the afternoon. Photographs were taken, Ghost and Emma in front of the school, Emma in her graduation gown with both her grandfather and her mother, Emma surrounded by her brothers in leather as they formed a protective circle around her. The bikers were respectful, careful not to intimidate or overwhelm, but their presence was unmistakable. They'd come to celebrate one of their own. By late afternoon, when the official ceremonies and family celebrations had wound down, Ghost and Emma rode together toward the clubhouse. Emma sat behind her grandfather, her arms wrapped around his waist, her head resting against his back. The wind rushed past them as the Harley cut through the streets, and Ghost felt Emma's grip tighten slightly, not from fear, but from love, from the simple joy of riding free. The clubhouse was fully prepared when they arrived. Someone had strung lights across the back patio. Someone else had arranged tables laden with food, everything from barbecued ribs to homemade desserts, contributions from the brothers and their families. A sound system pumped out classic rock, and the smell of grilled meat mixed with cigarette smoke and exhaust. Tiny stood at the entrance, his massive frame silhouetted against the neon signs. When he saw Emma, he broke into a genuine smile, the kind of smile that revealed the man beneath the president's authority. "Congratulations, sister," he said, hugging Emma gently. Then he turned to Ghost. "You did good, old man." "We did good," Ghost corrected. "Together." The celebration lasted until midnight. Ghost watched as Emma moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations, telling the story of her recovery, sharing the joy of this moment with men who'd become her brothers. Some of the older bikers, men in their 60s and 70s, sat with her and shared their own stories of loss and redemption, of how the club had saved their lives. Around 2 a.m., when the party had wound down and most of the brothers had left, Ghost and Emma sat on the roof of the clubhouse, looking out over the sleeping city. Emma had changed into a t-shirt and jeans, and she leaned against her grandfather, both of them exhausted and happy. "Grandpa," Emma said quietly into the darkness. "Yeah? I've been thinking about what I want to do with my life, about college and everything." Emma paused, gathering her thoughts. "I want to study social work. I want to help kids like me, kids whose families are broken or missing or fighting. I want to show them that there's hope, that there's always a family somewhere, even if it's not the one you were born into." Ghost felt something settle inside him, a sense of rightness, of purpose being passed forward like a torch. Emma had learned the lesson that his life had tried to teach her. That family is what you choose, that love means sacrifice, that some promises are worth everything. "That's beautiful, baby," Ghost said. "That's a good life you're going to have." "Because of you," Emma said. "Because you showed me what it means to be loyal, to honor your word even when it costs everything." Ghost pulled his granddaughter close. "No," he said gently, "because of you. You chose to heal. You chose to walk when you could have given up. You chose to see the good in the men who stood behind you instead of judging them for who they are." They sat in silence as the night slowly transformed into dawn. The first light of morning touched the sky, painting the clouds in shades of pink and gold. The city was waking up, trucks heading to early deliveries, birds beginning their songs, the world preparing for another day. Ghost thought about the last year, selling his first bike to save his granddaughter's life, the shock of 97 brothers standing with him, the new Harley under his hands, the trials and tribulations, the slow, painful process of Emma's recovery and her determination to become whole. He thought about promises, the ones he'd made to the club, the ones he'd made to Emma, the one he'd made to himself 43 years ago when he first put on the Forsaken Son's colors. And he understood finally and completely that the greatest promise wasn't about staying alive or riding fast or surviving the violence of the world. The greatest promise was about showing up for people who mattered. It was about standing firm when circumstances demanded flexibility. It was about choosing family, whether born or chosen, and protecting that choice with everything you had. "I love you, Grandpa," Emma said, as the sun climbed higher, beginning to erase the stars. "I love you too, baby," Ghost replied. "More than I've loved anything in my life." They watched the sunrise together, an old man and a young woman, separated by generations, but connected by sacrifice, by loyalty, by the unbreakable bond forged when one person decides that another person's future is worth any price. When they finally climbed down from the roof and headed toward their motorcycles, Ghost felt lighter than he had in years. The weight of his past hadn't disappeared. He still carried the scars, still remembered the crimes, still understood that he'd wasted decades of his life on mistakes and rage. But now those things didn't define him. Now he was defined by Emma's pride, by Tiny's faith, by 97 brothers who'd proven that loyalty meant something, by a granddaughter who'd learned to walk again and had chosen to use her steps to help others. Ghost climbed onto his Harley, and Emma settled behind him, arms wrapped around his waist. The engine roared to life, and he felt the familiar vibration settle into his bones. "Ready?" he called back to her. "Ready!" she shouted over the noise. They rode out into the morning, two figures on a motorcycle cutting through the light, heading toward home, toward whatever came next, toward a future that had been paid for in sacrifice and was being lived in gratitude. And as they rode, Ghost made a new promise. One he would keep every single day for the rest of his life, that Emma would never ride alone, that the brothers would always have her back, and that the Forsaken Sons would pass down the legacy of loyalty to the next generation, proving that family isn't always blood, but sometimes something far more powerful, a choice made in leather and chrome, sealed in brotherhood, and renewed every sunrise. Thank you for riding with us through Ghost and Emma's complete journey. Subscribe now for more stories of honor, loyalty, and redemption. The road ahead is long, and there are many more brothers and sisters waiting for their stories to be told. See you on the next ride.